Gotcha.
It was my little pony, my little pony, my little pony.
The Thunderbolt Horn is a Rarity 7 horn in Monster Hunter World. It doesn't really have a unique weapon model. It uses that beetle hammerhead model, right? It has the same sound as well. And then it has kind of like a Kirin pelt wrapped around it. It's also not terribly expensive to build, but you will need to fight a lot of high rank Kirins in order to gather the Kirin Horns. If you want to upgrade it all the way to Rarity 7, you're also going to need Zenajiva Shell for the final upgrade, making this an endgame horn. Let's go ahead and get started with taking a look at Thunderbolt Horn's attributes. So it actually ties with the Vespoid Horn and Legia Horn for having the lowest attack value in the Hunting Horn weapon class. It then has the highest Thunder Element attack value of 540 compared to Lightning Drum's 240. In fact, 540 elemental damage is higher than any other horn except for the Datura, which deals 540 poison, but that's a status effect. And the second highest elemental damage is done by the Anja Baron, which deals 450 fire damage. However, with that being said, as of this video, elemental damage is feeling kind of weak, particularly on the horns. I could see Capcom buffing this in the future, and we'll have to delve into that with some damage tests if they ever do. In fact, because this horn has the highest elemental damage of any of the hunting horns, if Capcom were to offer, I don't know, like a skill similar to Elementless or perhaps just a regular buff to the elemental damage types, if that were to occur, this could end up being one of the most damaging hunting horns as long as you're fighting a monster weak to thunder. The next thing I noticed is that the Thunderbolt Horn has a decently sized blue sharpness bar, so you wouldn't need Handicraft in order to extend that. I did test Handicraft 3 on it. It doesn't turn into a white sharpness bar. I have not tested Handicraft 5 on it though. Also, the Thunderbolt Horn does not offer any decoration slots and can only be augmented twice. Finally, like we do with all of the horns, we're going to have to examine the horn buffs. Starting out, interestingly, the Thunderbolt Horn is the only hunting horn in the game with Thunder Resist Large. I think Capcom did this on purpose, so that if you actually use this against another Thunder monster, you are going to be dealing less damage for having Thunder damage on the horn. I also tested Thunder Resist, and yes, it does give you immunity to Thunder Blight, so this skill is useful for countering, in my opinion, Tempered Kirin, but that's about it. I wouldn't use it to try and counter high rank Kirin, because high rank Kirin doesn't really deal enough damage that the damage reduction is so necessary. Also, obviously I wouldn't use it against Tobi Kadashi because he's pretty easy. It's also worth pointing out that we might see more Thunder monsters in the future, so we'll keep an eye on this horn. Now we have to take a look at the other two defensive buffs, because remember, the reason I'm saying you could bring this as a way to turtle against Thunder monsters is because the Thunder Resist actually stacks with the other defensive buffs. We have Divine Protection and Recovery Speed. Divine Protection is actually a lot better than I think people give it credit for. It has a chance to block an incoming move by a whole 50%. Since we're talking about percentages, it's really going to block a lot of damage, especially against hard-hitting monsters. Divine Protection is especially useful then. How often does it trigger? You know, I was going to test it. I still haven't gotten around to doing that, but it appears to be pretty consistent. I can tell you I've used it for a long time now. There's a lot of different ways you can use Divine Blessing. That's a skill. I've played around with that as well. I want to say like every 3 hits, one of those 3 is definitely going to be blocked. Since we're talking about blocking 50% of the damage you take, you can turn a 2-shot death into a 3-shot death, and that's meaningful. And finally, recovery speed. So when you take damage from a monster, you'll have that little red bar of health, and that's recoverable health. And you'll see your little green health bar just ticking back really slowly, right? When you have this skill, it ticks back really fast. So recovery speed is very nice, and I keep it running all the time. Surprisingly, it pairs very well with Divine Protection. You take 50% less damage, and then you got that red health bar. That starts coming back. It's almost like you took 75% less damage. Really nice. Alright, so the remaining buffs, let's talk about the next one. We have Health Recover Small. I don't use this one very often. I don't think it's, it's not that strong unless you queue up 3 of them, run through all 3, and then do the Encore. The Encore will trigger 3 Health Recover Smalls at the same time for an actual decent amount of health. So if you have a teammate who's in trouble and you've got all 3 Health Recovers queued already, you can actually start running through them and then get the Encore, and he won't have to drink. He'll be rolling that's what a lot of players do. When they've been hurt real bad and they're near the monster, the very first thing they do is they start rolling away. And while he's rolling away, you're already going into your performance and scrolling through the melodies. And then when you hit the Encore, he's got a nice little chunk of his health already healed, and he's not in danger, and maybe he doesn't even need a drink. So, but that's like an ideal situation. It doesn't really always work out that way. The nice thing about the Health Recover buffs, at least, is that it applies to everybody in the team. But in general, it's not the best move. Then we have the Elemental Attack Boost. I generally don't worry too much about this buff. I throw it out there eventually, but it's not a priority. Usually the defensive buffs are a priority. The problem with the Elemental Attack Boost, well, it gives you 50 more damage in your elemental attack value, but I find, especially on the Hunting Horn, it only shifts my damage by like 1 to 3 points per hit. Really a pitiful amount. I don't know if it works the same way with all of the weapons in the game. I hear that bows and dual blades actually deal pretty good elemental damage, so if you have them on your team, then you might be more considerate about making sure the elemental attack boost is up, but for slower weapons, I don't know how useful it is, honestly. Last but not least, you have the Sonic Waves buff. So this isn't really a buff, it's basically a Screamer pod, but the problem is, the windup is so long, it's not a very effective Screamer pod. You're almost better off just putting the weapon away and firing an actual Screamer pod, right? So I don't think any Horn users necessarily using it as intended, but it's still a good buff. Why? Because it queues up after 3 Super Pounds, and the Super Pounds deal pretty consistent good damage. They keep you in place while you're attacking, which is really nice. So really you get to spam your bar note attacks, right, your note 3 attacks, and go right into a performance. So it's it's a good buff for damage output when it comes to your combos or your moveset. And yeah, so that's a good thing at least. I was actually testing it out on a speed run earlier, and I got it down to 3.5 minutes. So that was pretty cool. Okay, and so finally we have to talk about how you should build for Thunderbolt Horn. I'll show you 2 builds. One of them's just for doing damage, and the other one will be for fighting Tempered Kirin. The build I used for dealing damage, I did bring a piece of armor for increasing my thunder damage, but I was very careful not to bring it past 650. Remember, the elemental attack boost buff gives you 50 elemental damage, and what you need to know is that there is a limit to how much elemental damage you can deal, and that limit is 700, so you don't want to bring your thunder damage past 650, because what you'll do is you'll use the elemental attack boost, and that'll bring it up to 700. Does that make sense? You don't want to go over it. And then on the Kirin build, I just go pure defense. I go stun resist, paralysis resist, right? I get immunity to both of those. And then I'm wearing the Kirin armor set, which has really good thunder resist. And then finally I set down all of the damage resistance that I'll get with the buffs themselves. And at that point I'm pretty tanky versus a tempered Kirin. It's actually a lot of fun. If you've never tried it, you should just give it a try, at least to see what it's like. Alright guys, well I think that's everything I have to say about the Thunderbolt Horn for now. It feels like a very niche horn, which the developers probably intended for you to use to be able to turtle against thunder monsters. And then if you're using it for its damage, it's not that good because the elemental attack values on horns is not that useful right now, but if Capcom were to change that, this might be one of the most damaging horns when you're fighting a monster who's weak to thunder. Since I have mixed feelings about it, I am going to give it a mixed tier rating. I'm going to place it into the B tier. I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.
Oh my gosh, you guys! I just want to thank y'all so much!